So this is the Toshiba T5200/100. Now this is a 386DX20. It's got a 100 meg hard drive and 4 megs of RAM. It's really impressive because this only came out in 1988. This particular one here, we've actually got Windows for Workgroups 3.11, and it's actually high enough spec that I should be able to run Windows 95 on it, which came out 7 years after the machine. So it's doing its RAM test now. Now there is a built-in CMOS setup that you can use, but getting into it's a bit of a pain. You sort of have to have an error before it'll let you get in. So I like these machines a lot, and especially this one. This particular model is very, very easy to pull to pieces if you need to remove certain components, and it will run with a whole bunch of its gear disconnected as well. It makes it really easy for diagnostics. And it's just great to work with. Everything comes apart really easily. So I won't load up Windows because it does take a little bit of time. We load up something like Accolade's Test Drive. We've got EGA. And you can see the scales of grey there are actually quite good on the plasma display. Now it is VGA. You can hook up a colour monitor to the back of it. And it does a pretty good job. It's a pretty quick little VGA card. It's as good as any 16-bit ISA card that I've used. The game does play relatively smoothly. Go back to DOS. That was interesting there because I noticed that game came out in 1987. Now my memory from the late 80s is a lot of people were running sort of XT's 286s, maybe the old 386, and a lot of them would have actually had trouble with this game. But this portable actually does play it all right. What else have we got? We've got Command Keen 5. I've got 50 megs of free space, so I've got lots of opportunity to add more games and titles and that sort of stuff. Now, of course, one of the cool things with these machines is they do have ISA slots. So I haven't got speakers hooked up, but this does actually have a Sound Blaster installed. It's also got a network card, and with Windows for Workgroups, that means you can actually get it on your home Microsoft network, which is quite handy. So you just pull files straight off your machines. Put that in a return to demo. Now this machine did take me a while to get finished, and that's why I haven't put up a video before now. And that's because when I bought it, it had a faulty hard drive. I got the hard drive working in about 5 minutes, and then found the floppy drive didn't work. And then in the case of trying to repair that, the motherboard stopped responding. So it's had a replacement motherboard, replacement floppy drive, and yeah, the floppy drive was actually the hard thing to identify. Now what is good about that is that does mean that down over here I have a complete spare T5200 to show you what things look like on the inside. So I'll just give you a quick tour. So over here we have the removable memory interface. Being removable is quite handy, particularly if you can buy one of these on eBay with the SIMs already in it. They are 40 pin and they're proprietary, and there's a meg on board there as well. And because they're proprietary, basically if you need this machine to come with 4 megs of RAM, make sure it's got a couple of SIMs in here. If you need it to come with 12 megs of RAM, make sure it's got 12 megs of RAM built in. Because you're not going to find those individually. There's a little piece at the back here is the ISA backplane. She has 16 and 8-bit slots. A 16-bit sound card will work great in there, and a 16-bit Ethernet card will work great in there. That's a good combination. Back in the day, probably would have just had a modem in there if you didn't buy Toshiba's modem, because of course there's a little 16-bit interface down here, and the most common use for that was the Toshiba modem. So we've got a normal ROM here, support chip 386DX20, and the maths coprocessor can go here. 40 pin IDE, that is standard, but the machine only supports limited drive types, so I'd keep your 40 and 100 meg Connors lying around, because that's what it'll need. Standard hard drive I think is a CP3104, and that's what's on this one on the left here. 34 pin connector, you'd hope that was for your floppy, but it's actually VGA, and it's the internal version that has power for the plasma display and all the signals required to fire that display. Here's the 20 pin floppy port, and that's proprietary. As far as I know from the pinout, it is the standard pinout that was used by Epson and a few other brands and Yamaha and things like that for devices where you were only going to have one floppy drive. I haven't found another 20-pin drive that I could plug in there that would work, however. They power up, but either the heads won't move or the thing won't spin. I think some of the signals changed position depending on the machine. And that's a pain because getting these drives is very, very tricky, and it's either you pay a lot of money or you find a parts machine, and I was lucky enough to find a parts machine for mine, but it's something to watch out for. You sort of want one that's got a working floppy drive is very, very handy. Now at the back here, this is actually the I/O module, which I'm just going to disconnect. And this comes off completely separate, and it's basically the back of the machine. So if we have a look here, now you notice the VGA port is upside down, and there's a good reason for that. It's because this top slice here is actually its own VGA card, and it can be disconnected and it's completely separate from the computer. Now, the good thing about that is if the video chip ever fails, you can remove this from the system, or even just remove the whole card. But you can see it's got its own EPROM there. So if you remove this whole module, you can then put in a normal 16-bit ISA VGA card and use that instead. The only problem with that, of course, is that your plasma display won't work. But it's a good backup if you really want to keep the thing running and you haven't got a spare video card. Now, of course, with this disconnected, the machine should still start fine. All you should need to actually get it running, or to actually power up and do something, is a motherboard and power supply. That's one thing I like about these modular systems. They're quite well designed. You also notice if you have a quick gander at the motherboard there's very, very few capacitors. The capacitors that are there, most of them are just electrolytics and they're just for filtering. So you see them here on the power lines, and there's another one down here. Now, these ones are quite fat and starting to bulge. They haven't leaked yet, but I'm probably going to have to replace them at some stage. But still, very minimal capacitors. Usually if you have a problem with these boards, usually what I find is it's cracked solder joints and board flex and that sort of thing. And I'm pretty sure that's what's wrong with this one. Basically just the movement of the board as it bends around inside the case from when you push in different locations, it moves slightly, and over time that can cause particularly old solder to crack, and I'm pretty confident that's what was wrong with this. My Toshiba T3200SX had the same problem around the keyboard area. You had to make sure the screws were really, really snug and tight so that the board was kept completely flat, and then you had to be careful not to push down on the keyboard, because when you push down on this area there was a little sensitive connection somewhere that was causing a problem. And out of interest, Toshiba seems to be quite well known for their board flex problems, just by not putting in enough screws, or too large of a gap between screws. And what that happens is when you put weight on the machine, it causes the board to bend. The Pentium 3 era Toshiba was really bad for it. Quite often you'd have to resolder the power connectors on a lot of the Pentium 3 laptops, because they put the power connector with no supports right underneath the mouse pad, which is where everyone puts their hands. And that would basically cause all the solder joints to crack, and then eventually the laptop would fail. And that's easily fixed with a soldering iron, but you have to know where you're looking. So that's about it for that. I'll go back to this little girl here. She does have a couple of interesting features. One is the removable display. Now there is a screw on the back to hold in the removable display, which is quite annoying. I don't know why they felt the need to put a screw on something that was otherwise an awesome idea. But you can leave the screw disconnected. You don't have to keep screwing it in each time, which that's a nice bonus. So just get that nice and loose, which it is now. And let's see if we can lift this off for you. Now if you're wondering what the point of this is, basically the idea is that you would come into your office, you would take this screen off, and you would place the laptop in front of your nice big colour VGA display. And there we go, the display's off. Now the machine is actually still running. And I'll pop this display back on in a second and I can show you it's still running. But it's still fine. You can even power it up without the display. All this does is just slots back in here like that. And there's the display going again. And these little clips just go up and across. Which can be a little bit tricky on an old machine like this. Particularly because I haven't lined everything up properly. Yeah, they're not going to go back in. But yeah, I mean, age has an effect on those sorts of features. But that was a great idea. Previously, you'd have to have your display either sitting next to the machine, or you'd have to, like, you couldn't put the screen down because you needed the keyboard. So the removable display feature was quite nice. Let me just try and get this to click back in properly. There we go, now it's in. And that just clips back up, and that's your normal portable. Now of course, if you want to reduce the wobble a little, you can tighten that screw in the rear again, but to be honest, it's just fine just working like that. Now while I've got it here, I'll just sort of show you how it comes apart, if it's going to let me. I'll just power that off, and just take out the power out of the back. Okay, so this here, this clicks up from the front, if it wants to. Now of course you have to undo all the screws first. This one is being unscrewed because I just did the floppy drive in it. It doesn't always want to come undone. There we go. This keyboard just rolls on forward. And now if you can see there, we've got access to the memory module, just. You can see the Intel 386 and the 387 in this one. There's the IDE connector, your EEPROM. Now the next piece is, once you've got this loosened, is this just lifts up and slides back. There we go, and it's off. You notice there's no cables. It's very handy. So if you need to get in there and work on this machine, it's very, very, very easy. And we just have a zoom in on that. Okay, so this big black thing in the middle here, that's my battery holder, which I'm using for the CMOS. We've got the 100 meg hard drive down here, little 3.5 inch IDE. It's pretty impressive for 1988. Floppy drive. There's the connector that our plasma display clicks into. Got our power supply here, and around the back, should I put that keyboard there so the cable doesn't get down. There's also panels that go down the back here which have been removed. And if I just bring the camera down a little bit, you might be able to see in there. You can almost see in there. You just see there's your ISA cards just sitting in the back there. And this is that I/O module I showed you earlier and where that sits. So what you could have back in here in this little plated area, so you have two ISA cards, or you can have an ISA card and the big 16-bit Toshiba, which has a big plate that comes out the back here, and that was for your modems and that sort of stuff. We spin it around. You see you've got your fans. Got two fans on the right, one on the left. And it's quite a big power supply for the size of the machine, and they're very good. I've never had any of these power supplies cause me any trouble whatsoever. They've always worked absolutely great. And so that's one thing to know. Unlike a lot of other machines, it's the power supply you worry about. But on this one, the floppy drive was the biggest pain out of everything. So this just slots back in here like this. That's on there. 1, 2, 3 screws at the rear, and of course to get the keyboard off, and this top module there's screws that go up from underneath as well. And then this just clips the back first. Once again, this is a bit tired, so sometimes it can take a bit of work to get it to clip in nicely. You can tell that's not quite right because it's not flush at the back there. There we go. That's nice. And when this is lined up properly, this should just clip down like that. And there's one little good feature left. You can see at the bottom there, we've actually got a security lock. So if I roll that, randomize it, nobody can open my laptop until I set the key combination, and she's opened up again. So you can see by me just sort of playing with it there and pulling it apart and not being terribly careful about it, just exactly how reliable these machines are and why I think they're good for enthusiasts. Because if anything breaks on them, it's just easy to work on, and you can focus on the problem rather than focusing on 100 other small little things. Now I compare this to other laptops. I had a Zenith Slim Sport 286, and like just getting to the motherboard was a very painful process. And getting all, well, it's not really painful, but it's just awkward, and you're not too sure where everything is, and you're not too sure how everything unclips. On the Toshiba, it's larger and everything is blatantly obvious. There's also, I mean, yeah, it's also a good games machine for dragging around. You want a 386 gamer, absolutely brilliant machine. So you don't see many T5200 100s around, and I suspect a lot of that was probably, I would suspect, due to the price when they were new. I would imagine that it was quite a price. 1988, you had a full-powered 386DX, not some little cutback SX, or something with little integrated graphics, a full modular 386 with ISA expansion slots that is portable and comes with up to, I think it was something like 16 or 18 megs of RAM. That was your maximum, but yeah, standard was 2, and like, oh yeah, this one here's got 4. I mean, yeah, this is a computer that 7 years after its release can still run the latest operating system, which is Windows 95. Personally, I wouldn't put that on here. Windows 3.11 works great. Word for Windows, you can actually open that up and have a full, what you see is what you get text editor, and you can sit there and do your layouts and your images and all that sort of stuff, and it does the job. Out of interest, quite often when these machines come to me, you see they live 2 stages in their life. The first stage is primarily for the late 80s, especially early 90s, where they'll have a networking setup on them. And then towards the mid to late 90s, it seems almost everyone that I've had arrive has had the original configuration sort of squished away to the side, but still there, and someone's installed a menu in WordPerfect. And basically I think these were great machines for in the office with networking and that sort of stuff. But once they retired, they usually went to people's houses and were used as word processors. And in DOS, these are actually really, really quick machines. So for something like WordPerfect, this would have actually been brilliant. And it's interesting because I'd say almost every one of these I've had arrive has had WordPerfect 5.1 on the hard drive. Machine I got, T3200 that I got a few days, it's actually a few months ago now. When that turned up, they'd come up with a menu, and the only option was WordPerfect or exit to DOS. So yeah, definitely a good WordPerfect machine. They're great to type on as well, so I suppose that's got something to do with it. Anyway, I don't have anything more to show you, so I hope you enjoyed that video.